The Knights of Ren podcast is brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., your source for Star Wars Destiny singles, sealed product, and more. Check them out at coolstuffinc.com.
Show me again the power of the darkness.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll. D20radio.com. Welcome back, everybody, to the Knights of Ren Season 3, Episode 301. With me are Rick and Jay. How are you guys doing?
Doing well. Glad to be back.
I'm doing great.
Awesome. So this week we are going to just be talking about the store championship. You guys have played yours. Mine is coming up near the end of July, so I've got a little bit of time to kind of toy with some decks and mess with my local meta out here in Orlando. But Rick went first, and then Jay played his event last week. So Rick, why don't you just give us a recap of, your event and what happened?
Sure. Last week I wasn't on the show because I was playing in a store championship. I was at Curio Cavern in Springfield, Virginia. We had, I think, 44 players in this store championship, complete max capacity for the shop, which is great. The Northern Virginia community is really big on Destiny. There was a wait list actually for this store championship, but I digress. So I took Qui-Gon Rey to the event. I'll do a quick rundown of the deck list. Battlefield is Echo Base, Elite Qui-Gon, and Elite Rey. Running as upgrades 2 Force Speed, 2 Force Throws, 1 Jedi Robe, 2 Makashi Trainings, 1 with the Force, 2 Rey Staffs, 2 Vibro Knives, and events Caution, 2 of those, 2 Defensive Stance, which I actually swapped out for the event to take covers. I'm just reading off my deck list here. 2 Force Misdirections, 2 Guards, 2 High Grounds, 2 Return of the Jedi, 2 Riposte, 2 Synchronicities, and I also had 2 Close Quarters Assaults in there as kind of my tech for the event. So first round, paired against Vader Raider, the updated list, which going into it I knew was a pretty bad matchup for me. Problem with the Qui-Gon Rey is a lot of your dice mitigation requires you to have dice out on the field. I mean, it's really good dice mitigation, like guard, taking a +2 melee die away from Rey and getting rid of 2 of their dice is great, but you have to be out there before them, especially with all the speedy tricks that are happening in the new meta. But this time with it, he kind of rolled a little slow, not hitting a lot of damage on Vader. I was able to turn 1, put 7 damage onto Vader directly through his 2 shields, due to Vibro Knife being able to do unblockable damage. The next turn, I was able to kill off Vader prior to Rey getting taken out, and then it was just mop up the Tusken Raider after that. He was a really good player. I think it kind of came down to, I knew my game plan going into it. He hadn't played too much against this version of the deck, so luck happened to be with me on that 7 damage swing in the first turn. And I really think you got to take out Vader first in this matchup, because the Tusken after that is pretty easy to deal with. So second round was against a Emperor Palpatine, Elite Palpatine. Basically what this came down to is the close quarters assaults, always hitting his Rise Agains, so I didn't have to deal with the extra 5 damage onto the Vader. Using guard to get rid of his dice, whenever I had a guard available, was just taking out the dice before he had a chance to hit any range damage on there. The shields in the Qui-Gon Rey matchup, in this particular matchup, just become defensive. You're very rarely using it to get any extra damage in, with the exception of a riposte to kind of kill off if you need it. But using all of the shields that you can output in this to get rid of the splash damage from the Palpatine die, so that it's not really eating you away like you would if you didn't have all that extra damage mitigation, really helps out. I was able to take him down in about 3 turns. It was 5 damage a turn pretty consistently. Didn't lose a single character in that match, just being able to split the damage up. And then the next round, I think that one was against Poe Maz. This one I'm going to be completely honest with you. She never rolled a special on the first roll of Poe. Never rolled a focus on the first roll with Maz. So being able to get rid of Poe's dice was relatively easy. There wasn't a lot of, roll in Poe if I don't get the specials right away, roll in Maz to be able to focus and resolve. I was claiming before she was most of the time. Close quarters assault, again, the reason why it's in the deck for these two matchups. I think one of them got rid of 2 thermal detonators, and the other one just cleared her hand, so she wasn't able to really do anything with it. Didn't lose a character in this match, but honestly, I don't know how much that was a factor of the rolls versus the play of the deck or the matchup of the deck. I don't know if it's a very good matchup. I honestly haven't lost to Poe Maz with this, but it's a very small sample size, so take that for what it's worth. The next matchup was a pretty fun one. It was against Kylo Vader. This one, I was able to kill Vader in turn 1. Yeah, he rolled 2 specials with Vader and resolved them both, and then with a combination of melee damage and synchronicities and Return of the Jedi to get back a synchronicity, I was able to kill him first turn. And then after that, he kept going for the Kylo special, but if you look at this deck list, there are so many deck cards in this that are 0 cost that he pulled a 0 cost every single time. There was only one turn where I drew my one with the Force and my Force throw, but I discarded them both before he was able to get off the special, because I knew that he would end up pulling one of those and taking out Rey, who was still sitting pretty low on health. But again, that was another didn't lose a character match, and the first turn kill was pretty fun for me. Then the last round of the Swiss was against another Kylo Vader. Didn't go quite as well that time. It was a real back and forth. I wasn't quite able to get the first turn kill off on that, but taking out Vader to where his specials on Kylo were pretty irrelevant. Basically turns it into another blank for me, but it took about 3 turns to burn Kylo down. He was rolling a lot more shields, and I did happen to lose a character in this one, but was able to get it out, which left me at 5-0 going into the cut. Basically, everybody that I beat, in with the exception of the Palpatine player, made the top 4 for this. I got paired up against the Vader Raider that I played against in the first round, who was really looking for a rematch, and after every round he was making sure that I won to help his strength of schedule. But we played best 2 out of 3 in this, and it kind of went his way a lot better than it did the first round, kind of the way that I thought that the match would end up. He took the first game. It was pretty close. It kind of came down to just having to dig away at Vader. Neither one of us was really rolling too much damage on that game, but his 3 damage sides versus a bunch of modified sides that were coming up for me eventually eked it out for him. He had fast hands and 4 speeds and stuff going on there. So I couldn't really get rid of the damage when it did come up. It was a lot of me having to proactively get rid of his dice, which kind of slowed me down a bit in the damage race. But with that matchup, I think it's pretty important that you play control in there. Won the second game. Still, it was a grind. Get rid of Vader pretty quickly. Synchronicity. Probably played about 3 times in that game to take him out, but then the third game, I got it down to just the Vader or the Raider versus Qui-Gon, and my mitigation basically could deal with anything but him rolling a resource and of course having the bait and switch. So he if I could have gotten rid of that 1 die, I would have won that match. But again, it's just the way that the mitigation goes in the Hero Blue. It's very particular. You got to have a very specific set of dice rolls to come up in order to be able to deal with what your opponent's doing. But he ended up going on to win the whole thing, so he was a great player. It was really fun matches with him, and actually everybody there was great. A lot of people, came up to me and told us how good we were doing on the show and everything like that. So, I mean, it was a great event, and I can't be upset with a 5-0 Swiss losing in the first round. So.
Based on this event, what are some of the cards you feel were the MVPs of the deck, and why?
Yeah, definitely one of the things I actually mixed up in the list there. We'll put out a full list on here. I actually added a last-minute Obi-Wan's Journal to there, and it really helps out the Vader matchup because you end up burning a lot of cards in the opening turns of the game between, Force Speed and the Vibro Knife on a Ray and then rolling out, and then all of a sudden you're at 3 cards. If they have a Vader out there, you're at 2 cards. So you have, probably 1 mitigation card, and then you have maybe 1 for a reroll. And like I was saying, that the dice sides are very particular with this deck. You want shields, you want melee, you want specials sometimes when you got a force misdirection and you need to get rid of something. So being able to get that extra card off the Obi-Wan's Journal to get another reroll or possibly draw into one of the 0 cost events like Take Cover or a Synchronicity or something like that really helps out a lot. And definitely the other card was the Close Quarters Assault. It's probably the reason why I won the Palpatine match. Just being able to, they keep so many cards in their hand through later into the turns, and just being able to clear them out, not allowing them to do too many rerolls to get to the damage sides on Palpatine, proactively getting things that they were going to holocron out with, force lightnings and mind probes, things like that. Really helps out there, because then you just got to concentrate on getting rid of 2 dice and only dealing 15 damage, which is pretty easy to do with this deck.
All right, and then the converse of that question, what are you going to pull out of the deck because it did perform as you had hoped?
Definitely going to be High Ground. The card looks like it has everything that you want on it, damage, mitigation, what have you, but the fact that it's a 1 cost, you got to have the battlefield, and you can only hit melee or range damage with it. It just really makes it too situational for me. One of the problems with it is that when you're playing on the control, when you're the control in the matchup, when you have to, mitigate the dice and things like that, you end up going a lot slower than your opponent, which means that they're more likely to claim the battlefield. And a lot of times, if you're sitting on that high ground, then you're going to end up claiming early the turn before and hoping that you keep the card in your hand throughout. They don't have any discard or anything like that to get it through, and it's the only way that you're going to get it. But it's also one of the only, in my list, it was the only card that could get rid of a die without having your dice out on the field. But it just wasn't able to get what I wanted, and it wasn't able to be used when I wanted to be used. A lot of times I was sitting in it with my hand and just never actually able to play it, end up discarding it for something else.
In what little testing I've been able to do for SOR, I have played against versions of the Rey Qui-Gon deck, and one thing that I found that's interesting, a lot of people think like that deck's dead in the water because Vibro Knife's the thing, and I've definitely been playtesting decks that emphasize how strong Vibro Knife is, but I actually ran into this awkward scenario, and I'm curious how much this has come up in your testing, where sometimes I actually want to pop off your shields so that you stop doing your shield shenanigans, and I actually had a little bit of trouble because of that, getting riposted and a lot of Qui-Gon triggers that I had to separate my damage up, which made me play slower so that I could not use the die. Have you run into anything like that, where sometimes if it's not lethal, your shields are still relevant and ergo you're still Qui-Gonning at full capacity?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I've found that a lot of times that I want that damage to be unblockable for me so that I can, I'll be sitting on a riposte, and before, Vibro Knife was a thing, you'd sit on that riposte and then end up taking a 3 damage out of nowhere that you didn't expect, or waiting just a little bit too long and then not being able to use it. But yeah, nobody was really taking, they saw the unblockable and they took the unblockable. You know what I mean? Nobody was really too worried about taking away my shields in that, but there were definitely a lot of times where they probably should have at least got a couple of them off with it. But yeah, I see exactly what you're saying there, and it is true that a lot of times that I want to keep my shields, even though, I'll be taking some amount of damage. You just try to minimize as much of it as possible. There's a lot of times that I had the option of getting rid of a Vibro Knife die that I would keep it in the pool just to be able to keep my shields.
So now that we've kind of gone through the deck, let's talk about the matchups. You've faced two of the decks that are very, very popular for discussion, and that's Palpatine and Pomaz. So let's talk about Palp first, since you got a much better sample size of what that deck is. So first of all, before we talk about the tournament, let's talk about your testing. Like, what have you tested in terms of Palpatine decks?
Yeah, I tested against a couple of versions of Palpatine, and I just found that you end up kind of playing a little bit of control and a little bit of aggro in this. As long as you're able to split the damage up to where, you know, one of your character takes 2 and the other character takes 2 off of his range sides or something along those lines. Hopefully you have enough shield generation going on to where you're, you know, hopefully only taking 2 actual damage in that. You'll end up getting through it. It'll be a long slogging game, especially if your opponent can get off the Rise Agains, but you're able to put enough damage into them. And especially with the Vibro Knives, the shield sides just become irrelevant at some point in that game. The synchronicities are unblockable as well. So I think it's actually a pretty good matchup. It's one of those that I haven't lost to, and I played a couple different versions of it, but it always plays out the same way. And that's, you know, one of the reasons why I added in the close quarters assaults, because, you know, if you can get out there early, you can get rid of their mitigation cards. If you can play a Vibro Knife on Rey, get 2 actions, roll out, hopefully roll 3 melee sides, or even better, roll out Qui-Gon first, and if they, you know, roll out, you know, their Emperor, then you do the Vibro Knife on the Rey and get possibly up to 5 melee sides out there. You can clear the whole hand, and then they can't really play the control side of it. The only problem then being is that they're more likely to claim first before you, which kind of puts you a little bit on the back foot on the next round. But then they're also going to be building up on Palpatine, and you should have a chance to get out there early.
So what are some of the things players should be aware of if they decide, hey, I'm going to play this Qui-Gon matchup? When they're facing Palpatine, what are some pieces of advice you would give to help give you a game advantage?
Again, use your shields for what their intended purpose is, to block some of that damage. Just kind of, you're not going to ever really use the riposte. If you draw them early, they're fine to discard to reroll. You'll get enough damage in there by your base damage sides and things like that. You know, Return of the Jedi for guard almost exclusively. It's so good against Palpatine, just to knock out his 2 dice if they roll, or, you know, to keep from him doing his potential 8 to 10 damage a turn, and it's pretty simple at that point.
Let's talk about the Pomaz matchup. This is a deck that a lot of people are talking about. A lot of people are trying to figure out what to do and how to get around it. So what did you do in testing to get this deck to a place where you could beat Pomaz?
Yeah, so I did a good bit of testing against Pomaz, and my outlook on the deck is a little bit against what the consensus is in my testing group. I personally like to go after Maz first. It's very easy with the deck to be able to burn her down in 1 or 2 turns, and then after that, Poe kind of has to play fair. It gives you a chance to be able to have him roll out and have, you know, at least an action or 2 to be able to mitigate his dice. Again, guard is a key card in this, to be able to get rid of his dice, and you kind of have to go after it any chance you get. Usually they're running the throne room, so you can't just leave a die out there for them to be able to claim and resolve off of it. Force misdirection is good here as well. You know, you're just going to take it whenever you can. If you happen to roll a ranged with a force throw, or, you know, even a blank on one of your dice, to be able to get rid of a blank on theirs, you know, just take the dice away whenever you can. You may feel like you're not getting value out of it, but it's, you know, one less turn that you're going to have to deal with one of those dice.
What are some of the things players need to look out for when they're facing Pomaz if they're going to be piloting your deck?
You never want to sit there, like some of the Pomaz are running It's a Trap. Not a lot of them, but they are out there. So you never really want to leave a special sitting on the board. It's happened to me on 2 occasions now where, you know, I left a Force Speed special out there because it just wasn't worth it to resolve. And then, you know, they It's a Trap in the 2 special sides on Poe and hit me for about 8 damage. It's not widely used in there, but it's just something to look out for. Anything else you really you can't control on the deck. It's you got to take the dice. You got to take the mitigation when it's available. Like the fast hands, the hit and runs, the Maz, her ability herself. It doesn't lend very well to your style of mitigation in this deck. So when you get an opportunity to take a dice away, take it.
So now that we've gone through your matchups and what you've played and what you've done, is there anything you would have done differently in the tournament that you would say might have given you an edge, since people are still going to be playing and getting ready for their store championships coming up in the next, month or two? What would you say you could have done that would have gotten you past that first round in the cut so that you could have gone to game 2?
I think a lot of it comes down to when I would play out like a vibro knife on array. Just on the drive home, I came up with one or two situations that I played it out, first action, when it would have actually been better off for me to play it out after they had rolled in, to be able to give a better chance of me getting a guard off or a misdirection or something like that. So instead of, I got a first action, just falling into the automatic play a vibro knife on array, roll in Rey and roll in Qui-Gon, if I just wait for them to do their first action, possibly roll out Qui-Gon first, see what happens, then I would have had at least 2 more opportunities to get rid of some dice, which may or may not have led to winning one of those top 4 games. But other than that, just, definitely probably going to cut high ground, probably for possibly a deflect, or we were even talking about the potential of adding flank in here, just because of the way that the matchups run out when you have to play control. Flank isn't something that you would normally run in a 2-character list, but the majority of the competitive list right now are 2 characters. A lot of that has to do with the Pomaz boogeyman going on right now, that people don't want to run 3-character lists because of the potential of U-wings and thermal detonators doing a lot more damage than they would against a 2-character list. So when you're running up against a 2-on-2 matchup, you end up playing a little bit slower than they do, so you're more likely to end up having more ready characters than they are, and flank can then hit any die on the table. I haven't tested it yet, but it's one of the things that I'm pretty interested to look at here.
And what do you think were some of the plays that you made that helped get you into that 5-0 going into the Swiss top cut?
Honestly, it was just knowing whether or not that I needed to be an aggro, need to be able to race the damage, or if I was just on the control in that matchup. And that's the best thing about this deck, is that it can play both. Just you got to know from basically the first action of the game whether or not you need to play control or you need to race them. So I think I made the choice correctly in most of the games, and it's the best part of the deck is just its ability to switch gears and play whatever matchup you need to play.
And then the last question is pretty important. What do you think are the strengths of the deck, and what do you think the weaknesses are?
As far as matchups, or just the deck in general?
Just the deck in general, because matchups are very dependent on your local meta and the player and so many factors you can't consider. But the deck as a whole, what does it do well, and what is it rough around the edges about?
Yeah, I'm just kind of go back to the fact that you can play whatever role you need to play in a given game. You can play control, you can play aggro, you can play a mixture of both if you have to. That's definitely the strength of the deck. The damage output is ridiculous when it wants to be, and it has a lot of good control options as well. But the weakness is just having to rely on very specific dice rolls to come out at very specific times in a game. There was countless times where I'd roll and it would be a normal good roll, but it wasn't good for the situation that I was in. And then, having to spend actions and cards to reroll when I'd want to be using them to get rid of their dice, it just kind of puts you behind. And then having to, if you have to be out there before them, in when you want to be getting rid of their damage dice. So again, it's not the deck for somebody that's very particular on winning and losing because of rolls, because there are going to be some bad ones, and it's just the way that this deck is built. So you have to be able to just take the bad rolls with the good in this one. You know, you can salvage some bad rolls in here, but it will put you on tilt if you're not ready for it.
All right, and then this is a personal question because I'm always intrigued by the way economy works. What does your cost curve feel like, since you have a lot of zeros, but you're also playing out your vibro knives, which eat up your money? You've got some 0 drops. You've also got some 1 drops for removal. So how do you feel about your resource economy?
The deck is very heavy on the 0 cost side. I did start off when I originally built it trying out a 1 of Destiny, and it just never was needed. Anytime that you're going to even run the highest cost card, the one with the Force, you're usually just going to override it before Ray dies, so you don't need it for there. You're generally only ever really spending 2 on average 2 resources a turn. There are times where you'll be sitting on 4 to 6 resources because of the way that the cards have drawn out. You don't need a whole lot of upgrades on your characters. It's usually a Makashi training, a vibro knife or 2, and a 4-speed, and hopefully you got a Obi-Wan's journal in there somewhere, and that's really all you need to do on there, and everything else is 0 or 1 cost, so you'll be able to play it out fine. I never had any resource problems with the deck, just due to the fact of the low cost curve.
All right, so moving along, Jay played his store championship this last weekend, and we'd love to hear about the deck, the matchups, and how the event went.
Yeah, so a little background first. I've been quite busy with work and haven't really had as enough opportunities to test the SOR meta as I'd like. And then early on, I played some fun decks. I did some FN things. I made like a Ventress Jabba list that I had more faith in than everyone else did. And nothing was really panning out, and I was kind of getting frustrated. And I wanted to take a more serious turn with store champs coming up. And then, life got out of control, and I had to deal with other stuff first and put Destiny on the back burner. And then when I came back, suddenly I had to compete. So I've made some friends since Worlds that have been pretty great. You may know them as the guys at Artificery. You may recognize their names on our Discord. There's Rusty, there's Pearl Yeti, there's Elrathian. They're a pretty cool group from the Washington area. With them, chatting with them, talking about their experiences and their ideas, I gleaned Rusty and Elrathian's, as they like to call it, Emo Kids deck, which is a Kylo and, young Vader, baby Vader, Anakin, whatever you want to call him. And so I took that list. And to just give you an idea of how prepared I was, 2 hours before the event, as I was, sleeving up cards, getting ready to try to catch the train and get to the store, I messaged Rusty and I was like, so how is Makashi training working out for you? And he said, what? I cut that from my list. What list are you using? I didn't even have his most updated list at the time. So he sent over his latest build. I then swapped out 8 slots again and hit the train and made it to the store. But what I was running, again, Emo Kids, the battlefield is the throne room. Then we have 2 holocrons, 2 force throws, 2 mind probes, 2 force speeds, 2 vibro knives, 2 force illusions, and that should cover all the upgrades. And then for events, we have No Mercies, we have Doubts, we have Manipulates, we had 1 Boundless Ambition and 1 Anger, 2 Feel Your Angers, 2 Isolations, 2 Overconfidences, 2 Deflects, and then we ran the support 2 of Meditates. And basically, it's good stuff blue, the stronger, just the 2 scariest force powers on top of holocron. You may notice there's not a lot of holocron support with just using the force throws and the mind probes, but what the deck also tries to do is use holocrons for cards like Meditate, for Anger, or even Manipulate if you're not using the holocron die for its intended purpose, and try to allow it to do double duty and make its double miss sides somewhat useful. It didn't come up a lot personally in the event for me, and I definitely want to try some more of that stuff out after playing this deck. I really liked this version, and even Rusty on YouTube has made a pretty cool breakdown on its strengths and how to play it, which I definitely recommend you checking out. It's really good stuff. I'm probably going to put a little bit of spin on it for my play style and taste, and I'll explain probably towards the end of this exactly what some of my hangups were. But at the event, we had 29 people at Games of Berkeley. The TO was my good friend Sean Redmond, who also competed. I knew almost everyone there. I'd at least seen them at a separate event in passing throughout the Awakenings meta. But there were a couple of new faces. Even one guy said he drove from like an hour and 40 minutes away because he had the weekend off. That was pretty crazy. Bravo to them. So we got our matchups, and round one, I immediately get matched up against one of my playtest partners, my buddy who went to Worlds with, Corwin, and he was playing Dooku Jabba. And for whatever reason, in my inaugural play of this deck, and it was also the first time I was playing on the Knights of Ren playmat, so maybe, that was giving me some extra oomph, but that game was not close, and I just did horrible, horrible things to poor Corwin. He could not find some of his stronger support cards and upgrades that he was hunting for as much as he wanted, and things like Personal Shields and Force Illusions and Dooku weren't really cutting it since I got an early Vibra Knife. Turn 2, I rolled out Young Vader, double special, rolled out Kylo, double special. Yeah, it was just like, I'm sorry, man. He's like, it's cool. On Kylo specials, I was hitting stuff of at least 2 value, and I pretty much... It was a short, quick match, and one thing I always had to commend, Carwin on is he has a really great attitude, and he was cool about it, shook hands, went on to the next match. So next round, I was playing against Chud, who historically would trounce me as Vader Raider in the Awakenings meta, but when SOR came out, he was pretty excited about Palpatine, and so... in the event that took place locally while I was at Worlds, he crushed everybody as Palpatine, and he wanted to go for that again, but he came across me. I managed to draw my deflects early, and I hit 3s. He scrambled a little, trying to get some of his better cards out. He got a little lucky in that I rolled a bunch of Kylo specials again, but this time, even though he had a Force Lightning bouncing around in his hand, I kept pulling 1-costs or even 0-cost cards, so I didn't jackpot, so to speak. But what I did manage to do is, even though for 2 turns he discarded his whole hand to try to draw up, and he got to those 5 resources, I managed to clinch it out with a No Mercy and cut the Viper off at the head, and he looked at his next card and it was Rise Again. He had 2 in his deck, so it could have gone either way. It was a pretty brutal match, as most Palpatine matches go, and I had a couple things I needed to go right, predominantly those deflects, but it could have been a lot worse for me. A good match. Next round, I recognize this person if I saw him, but tragically I forgot his name, which I feel bad. He's a fan of the show. Really nice guy. He was playing Young Vader FN, which a lot of people told me they expected me to play an FN list, which was something that I tested early. I really like FN. I think he's super fun, but I do think the lists that he really excels in are like the Unkar combos and so forth, and that's not really quite the style of deck that I like to play. I think Unkar is a great card. I think those lists are phenomenal, but I don't think they're just the type of deck that I want to do. So I kind of shied away from FN, because when he's not being cooperative, it's really trying to figure out, especially when like he rolls a dud die off of a weapon and then it's sitting there, do you take extra effort to make something of that die? Do you roll them out anyway? Because suddenly this like action economy cheat that you get turns into a deficit, and you have to backpedal or do something with it, and that definitely came into play for my opponent, as he really wasn't rolling out upgrades that offered him the ability to put pressure on me as I brought the hurt quicker. We both rolled like kings on our Young Vaders, but I was able to knock his out before he got mine, and then FN wasn't quite enough to take down my quite healthy Kylo and my not quite dead Young Vader, and I just overwhelmed him. Still a good match, but my tricks kind of came online and he fumbled, unfortunately, with his weapons. But still fun game. Fourth match, I played against a gentleman I hadn't met before, and I'm not kidding, guys, when I say that, like, I play in the land of, like, Vader Raiders are just bred in California, especially in the Bay Area. Like, I have to, like, when I wake up in the morning, I gotta beat a Vader Raider, and then I brush my teeth, and then it's a Vader Raider. Like, holy cow. So this guy brings Vader Raider, and I haven't met him before, and I'll just say this, it's the deck that haunts me. It's my kryptonite, and because I hadn't played him, clearly I had to get absolutely annihilated by this guy. It was painful. It was quick. It's one of the few times that I've conceded mid-match. I just looked at him and I just said, like, we could play this out. I just don't want to waste the energy. You know, nothing against you. You know, you played super well, but, like, he rolled like a god. He had fast hands on Vader, and each activation he got a 3, like clockwork. His Raider was doing the pain, and then he got my Yarn Vader on lockdown with he had the backup muscle, and my Yarn Vader was at 1 health. And just to, you know, I always try to get them to spend that damage anyway, and sort of like force their hands, so to speak. And so I rolled out my Yarn Vader, and I was sitting on a couple of resources, and of course I rolled the 2-3 sides for 1. Would have been a phenomenal resolution, but, you know, literally wasn't in the cards that day, and he ground me into the pavement. Again, super nice guy. That kind of, you know, that put pressure on me. I got a loss, so I was curious, like, what was going to happen. According to the tiebreakers, which were just updated on that round, I was in 3rd, so odds were still good, but, you know, there's only a top 4 cut, so I had to see, you know, what could happen, what was going to go down. Last round, I played against Pomaz, a cool guy named Connor, and it was good to see him again. He's come around to a couple of our events, and so it was neat to hang out with him. But he was playing Pomaz, and I was terrified because I have not played against Pomaz. In my group, a lot of my friends, I have sort of like, there's like 3 tiers of play groups I can play with locally. The easy one to get to, my regular group at Eudaimonia. Most of them have what they've been able to purchase. They don't have full decks. They don't have full lists. They play more what they like. It's not that, like, testing against them isn't valuable. I very much value the skill as players that they have, but it's not usually meta testing. As the other 2 places that I could play test go, it's way harder for me to get there. So I just, again, due to life and work and other things, I haven't been able to do a lot of meta testing. I played against some Palpatine. I had a little bit of familiarity with that, but Pomaz was like all new grounds for me. So I was thinking, like, you know, top 4 would have been cool, but I don't know what's going to happen here. He did not roll like a champ on his early turns. He tried to do things like good old hit and run and then get Maz out. Maz wouldn't roll focus when he needed it, and I did the unconventional route, but I saw the opening and I took out Maz on turn 2 as quickly as I could, hoping that I could just deal with the pressure that Poe was bringing. It worked out. I got a little lucky with 2 Kylo triggers, and I resolved 2 at once, and I managed to fish out a rocket launcher twice. So that's pretty good damage, you know, off of good old Kylo, and that spun it in my favor. I was able to deflect one of Poe's range damage dice, which gave me some more breathing room, and in the end, I hit him harder than he hit me, which put me at 4-1. I secured my 3rd slot place, and we went on a half-hour break and grabbed food, and I hung out with Sean again, the guy who was running it. He was 4-1. The only guy who went 5-0 was the Vader Raider player that smashed me, the gentleman named Matt. I talked with Sean. You know, we hadn't caught up since Worlds, and he's a good friend of mine. And we were both just kind of geeking out that we'd both done so well at a large event. He and I, he's an old Conquest buddy of mine, and, like, we haven't had the best luck in these larger events lately, so we're not used to this. So it felt really good, and, you know, we were scarfing down Taco Bell, and we were chatting so much we almost forgot to go back to the tournament. Good thing it was only 2 storefronts down, but still kind of funny. We sat down, and then we just realized as we walked in there that we were opponents we're like, oh yeah, you're second, right? He's like, yeah. I was like, yeah, it's us. And so I haven't played an official best of 3 in Destiny. This was like new to me. I'll mention one frustration of the deck now is that it's because it's got focus sides and because like Kylo's dice is a little weak on the numbers side. This deck does not do great in initiative. And what was really frustrating was against the earlier Vader Raider and the Sean, who was also playing Vader Raider. I would roll a 6, they would tie me, and then I would roll garbage, and they would roll high, and I'd lose my battlefield. And it's not, like that the Emperor's Throne Room could be just as much of a bane as it is as a boon, but it definitely would have been a lot nicer to have. He was using Secluded Beach, which if you don't remember, you can claim and remove a ranged die. Spoiler alert, of course I rolled ranged on my frickin' young Vader die, and after he like action cheated like a champ, he managed to, oh my god, game 1, this guy drops both force speeds and fast hands on his Vader, which seems redundant and seems like, well, what can he do? Like, that's not at least none of those upgrades are damage, but he would turn 2. We both came out swinging and hit each other for 7 in the first round, and then he got that setup going. And then round 2, I rolled out my own Vader and one of my sides was ranged, and then he rolled out fast-handed 2 force speeds. He force struck, lightsaber thrown, hit me for 6, rolled out Tusken, rolled the 3, and vaporized young Vader and had some damage left over for old Kylo, and that was pretty much it. Like, he just turned me to dust. Game 1. Game 2, I managed to get an inch in that Vader was at 3 health left and he had 1 shield, and I was able to, by sacrificing my whole hand, no mercy off of a 2-side on young Vader, killing old Vader. I lost my whole hand, but young Vader got to live another turn, and then he had Vader dice that he was going to kill my Vader with. He had to roll out and spend his Tusken dice. If he didn't, I was also sitting on a special on young Vader, which would have killed him, but I still would have been able to deal 3 damage. And my young Vader was able to hold out against his Tusken. And that game, I was able to squeeze it out. And it was almost entirely based on that, clutch no mercy. And then the last game was just a slugfest. And I mean, we were both feeling the pressure. We were both tired. Every time I rolled my dice, one of my dice would end up cockeyed on my deck, and I just felt stupid and embarrassed, and we were trying to focus, and everyone was surrounding our table because the top table was Vader Raider versus Poe Maz, and it was over in 4 minutes, not even kidding. That was just, their whole set was just instantly finished. The Poe Maz had won, and then this game, I killed Vader, he killed my young Vader, and then it was between Kylo with a vibro knife versus his Tusken, who had fast hands and eventually a vibro knife, and he had mitigation for days. And the most frustrating part was, for 3 turns, I desperately threw dice trying to get melee sides not to get removed, and he always had enough answers for them that I couldn't no mercy, and he managed to stave me off long enough, and then I had ran out of cards, and so playing more cards made it that my no mercy lost reach, and Kylo on his own towards the end can lose a lot of gas, and he managed to beat me down with his Tusken Raider, and that was the set. It was very close. I don't really feel like there were any major mistakes or misplays on either of our parts. Very tough matches. Commended him for how well he played. We shook hands, and then he went on to face another guy named Travis, who's also a good local player, another good Conquest buddy, and they slugged it out, and Sean was able to take down Poe Maz with his Vader Raider, and he took the whole event. And I ended up with 3rd. And by luck, because Sean was the TO, he didn't take prizes that were redundant to him. So the spot loss Phasma passed down to me. So that was cool. So it's like I got 2nd.
Nice. All right, so let's ask the same questions we did, Rick. What were some of the MVP cards in the deck that you were very pleased with how they played out over the course of the tournament?
So obviously deflect, as like Chud would tell me and tell everybody, he's like, I would love Palpatine even more if Deflect wasn't a card. Like, Deflect helps against Pomaz, it helps against Palpatine, obviously. A lot of errant characters and dice just have ranged on them, and sometimes just being able to get a die off the board. Like, I got a Mind Probe out one game, rolled it out, rolled that freaking 3 range damage for 1 and got it deflected in my face. It was like, come on! It's like one of the few range sides I have in my entire deck, but like it counts and that hurts. It's 2 damage. So obviously, I mean, we all know how great Deflect is from set 1, but Doubt and Overconfidence both can just hopefully reroll into more favorable results. Unfortunately, every time I Overconfidence Vader, he would roll into his 3 side and be like, cool. But typically, Overconfidence, it has 1,000,001 uses. Doubt can answer a lot of tricky cards, or, like one of my favorite uses if I have shields and they have Vibra Knife is to just doubt the Vibra Knife, then your shields work again. So things like that. The deck mostly had the usual toolboxes. I mean, I could say No Mercy, but everyone knows how freaking fantastic No Mercy is. And one of the reasons why I just love this deck is just, again, like, the amount of damage it can pump out is just nuts. If it rolls well, it can pressure you from a lot of different directions, and you can make the most out of a lot of weird stuff. And I like what the Artificery guys did by creating this, like, 0-cost curve and this, like, shenanigan interactive style that I wish I was a little more familiar with and I could have played towards it more. I didn't get Meditate out very often. I actually didn't get Holocron out very often. I think I only played like 2 Mind Probes like throughout the whole event. Oh, I will say, we did... Obviously, I played the Vader Raider from the Swiss again in the finals, fighting for 3rd place. And what was somewhat amusing is that my deck was clearly angry at the situation of how badly he beat me and just losing to Sean, that the end of game 1 in that set, Kylo had 4-speed Mind Probe, Vibra Knife. Young Vader had 4-speed Vibra Knife, Holocron. They were both alive at the end of the game, and it was just madness, like having all them basically like Voltroned out. So I got my revenge, so to speak, and we only played 2 matches. I managed to get them both times out of the best 2 out of 3. So vindication.
And then what were some of the cards you're definitely going to swap out for, better options?
Along the same lines of High Ground. High Ground wasn't in my deck, but like thematically, I love Anger. Regular Anger, not Feel Your Anger. It's getting confusing talking about these cards now, but thematically, I just absolutely adore Anger, and I want to find the situations to make that matter and count. And with like the manipulation and like coming off of a bad roll, I can see that sometimes you get that sweet hit, but in almost all of these matches, like I didn't have an opportunity to Anger if I wanted to. Either I just didn't get my dice out fast enough. So it's almost similar to like a hero removal card where you already have to be established. Things have had to happen and they have to have not hit you or resolved yet. That I just find it personally too slow. Maybe it's due to inexperience, but yeah, I never played it once. I had like 1 opportunity and it didn't happen. And as much as I like the card, I don't think I'm going to continue using it, but I do think it has a place. It's just rougher with the action cheat meta.
Going into this event, you said you weren't exactly super heavy on the testing, but you were able to get this deck to perform. What do you feel the strength of this deck is when you're playing Destiny?
So the nice thing about the deck is it's somewhat of a shell game on which one of my guys do you want to deal with first. I mean, Young Vader's dice are just horrifying. Like, the best thing about him is he can carry himself. He doesn't even need upgrades. So generally, I put all the toys on Kylo because Kylo needs a little help. I mean, even just a Vibro Knife turns Kylo into something to be, feared. But I wasn't as lucky with like Holocrons, as I would have liked, and getting those going and online and having like an ability to play with. But the cool thing that I like about the deck is that like there are decks where young Vader is the star and there's decks where Kylo is the star, where like I noticed in the Pomaz matchup, like after he, did his stuff, it was then his objective to just discard cards, like he was holding on to a Falcon and he didn't have any more Poe dice to resolve, and so he just had to discard the Falcon because I had Kylo showing. Or like as much as Rise Again can like really nail you, if you Kylo a Rise Again, you literally like inverted, you just defeated the whole purpose of the card, and that didn't come up. But just having that option of like Kylo rising more prominently due to the like play better stuff meta is really awesome to me, because I've always liked Kylo from the moment I picked up cards, and although he had a much rougher time in the Awakenings meta, I'm really glad that he gets to shine and that his special is something to be feared. Although there's so many great zero cost cards now that like everybody's playing, I think like my overall average of damage dealt by Kylo is 1. There's so many times where I grabbed, he doesn't like yous, bait and switches, doubts. Like I just kept picking cards that like literally did absolutely nothing. So as strong as he's gotten, he's also gotten weaker in some ways, but I still really like him. I didn't play a lot of blue in set 1, so again, that was one reason why it took me a little longer to come to this deck. I greatly enjoy the deck. I have more store champs coming, including I'm hosting the one on Saturday, and depending on how many other judges I can get to go there will depend on if I can play or not, and I am eager to tweet this deck and bring it back and hopefully go all the way again.
All right, so let's get into a little bit of the matchups specifically. Let's talk about Palpatine. This, like we've said before, is just a really popular matchup. People are testing him out and trying to figure out if he's really good, really bad, or, like where he sits. So what was your strategy when you sat down and you saw this is a Palpatine deck where you could try and, edge it out? Because Rick has shields, so he's got a little bit of sustain. He can kind of mitigate Palpatine's effect. You're on the other end of the spectrum where you can deal significantly more damage, but you also are going to be taking more, probably. On top of Vader can deal 3 damage, but he's going to hurt himself. So you have to use that effect fairly sparingly. So what were you doing in order to edge that victory?
So Palpatine is definitely a threat and definitely a deck that I think is going to stick around for a little while. It's recently been confirmed by Lucas that if you play the card, now you will die on a blank side. You can resolve it because it does functionally change the blank to a melee side, allowing you to do that 2 damage. So if they only have 1 guy left, it's just as good as, resolving a pay side or, anything else. And I think that it's actually a tech that Palp players should keep in mind, makes manipulate better. It's really gross. It's really scary. It's awesome. But in general for the matchups now, I mean, obviously I dug for deflects and I got there. So that's massively important against Palpatine. He has to be a little scared to keep his high cost cards in his hand because Kylo's scary. So he has to make a choice on like which guy to knock out first, because if he's hanging on to these fat cards and I can deal with his holocron, and he has to hang on to his, his lightnings and whatnot, trying to get them into play without paying for them so that he can save his money to Rise Again. Hopefully, Kylo can do his job and try to suss him out. Meanwhile, young Vader, hits like a truck, and the more he gets to resolve, the more he gets to do what he wants. He has 2 sides on his die that deal 3 damage, and that's 5 hits for old Palpy. So trying to make that work. This deck has 22 health. It's it's not the largest number obviously, but it's a modest amount of size, so you can take 1 nasty hit from Palpatine and be okay. Force illusion is obviously something you have to find, you have to slam down. That's another like MVP card, is being able to keep young Vader alive and do his shenanigans longer. And if a force illusion eats 3+ damage in one go, Kylo, I think you're in like incredibly great shape. And so I was definitely able to take the brunt of one of his lightnings and then throw the change onto Kylo. And I basically was able to resist his punishment just enough. But I mean, we both agreed had he rose again, had he got a lightning attached to him after I'd spent both of my deflects, like it might have just been one more turn and he would have just went nuclear on me. So you have to be kind of quick. I definitely went for that execute with the no mercy. Like that was certainly part of my game plan, and that can dictate like who you roll out first and what you're trying to do to make sure you can secure that hit. Yeah, it's scary. I mean, like Palpatine, every turn he gets to activate, if you don't have mitigation, it's gonna be over quick. Like he doesn't have to try.
You mentioned Force Illusion there. Do you think that's good in the meta as a whole, or is it just really good against Palpatine?
I think it's good against Palpatine and Pomaz because neither of them can use the dreaded Vibra Knife. And in the matchups where like Vibra Knife is being played, I mean, in that case, it's kind of more of a mirror. I mean, Vibra Knife's mostly played in the aggro matchups, and then it's just, who gets online faster. And again, I have some answers for cards like Vibra Knife, like you can overconfidence it, you can doubt it, you can you can deal with Vibra Knife in a way to keep Force Illusion online if need be. You just have to know, like, is Vibra Knife going to be an issue or not? And it can absorb different types of damage, like, it can need a Force Strike. It could eat a lightsaber throw, like, those are the types of things. It could eat your riposte, even though you have a Vibra Knife on. It doesn't help your riposte damage. I mean, I'm sure you wouldn't do it, but I'm just saying, like, it would deter you from doing it likely because I'm sitting on said Force Illusion. I think it plentifully has a place and is a staple even in the Vibra meta.
All right, so let's talk about the Pomaz matchup. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what your deck did and can do to beat Pomaz and your thoughts on strategy on defeating that deck.
So, I mean, take this with a grain of salt. I've played against the deck once. I feel like things pretty heavily went in my favor. I wish I recalled it a little stronger, but I mean, like, Kylo hitting 2 rocket launchers for 3 damage, like, was definitely a lot, definitely good for me. And obviously Kylo is a little favored there. I definitely got both of my Force Illusions, which I dug for, and again are strong against, a meaty Poe hit. I was able to shrug off 4 damage. I mean, that's huge. That's a ton. Maz isn't doing any damage herself, so the deck is clearly trying to slam you hard with Poe resolutions and then planetary uprising you out. He only got 1 planetary, which, I mean, one's scary, but I also was able to force speed and claim before him on some of my activations, and when he lost a little bit of gas after losing Maz early, I was able to stabilize and sort of take control of the match. In all honesty, thinking about it later, and I mean, you can't definitively say, like, I would probably try to kill Poe first with this deck, and then just let Maz, like, do nothing the rest of the game. Obviously try to planetary you out, but hopefully you can, cut her down. It would depend heavily on, what type of events are taking place, but probably kill Poe. This deck, has the strength, has the power. If you can survive 1 round against the horrible things it does to you, hopefully again get those illusions down. Those illusions go for miles. If you're lucky and Maz sputters and they roll out some range and that deflect comes online, like bonus or overconfidence. Overconfidence is like just one of the nastiest cards, being able to guarantee they lose something, and ideally they roll worse than the results they had in general, or, like I was overconfidencing like Vader's dice, so at worst he ends up with a 3, which he kept doing, but ideally in other scenarios he'd only roll a 2 or a non-damage side, and then he has to fix it, and I've removed, one of his Vader dice, which feels great. So that same thing goes for Poe. Basically, again, I can't speak too much on this strat. I hope to get more practice in against Pomaz. I wish I could have played against Travis, who was the Pomaz who made it into the finals, and see how he plays. he's a very good player. I'd rather give a more detailed and thorough breakdown once I know more. But Force Illusion, basically it's what Connor said. It was just like when you played that and you ate that 4, I pretty much lost all my reach.
So as you're piloting this deck and you've learned a lot of things about it, what would you say as a tip or two for our listeners is something you can do to make this deck just kind of shine? Because some decks are control, some decks are aggro, some decks are mid-range. What do you think this deck does best, and how can players capitalize on using that to its maximum efficiency?
So this is predominantly an aggro deck doing its best to bring the pain. Try to make Kylo a spicy target as well to hopefully draw away some hate and attention, or even make them scared of him enough that you can keep young Vader around. Again, you really don't need to throw things on young Vader. I mean, if the opportunity arises, like you get to take extra actions and you can like sneak them on after they've claimed or something, like, I'm not saying never do it, but the more heat you can draw to Kylo and the longer you can keep young Vader around, typically the better you're going to do, because young Vader is just a powerhouse of a character. So that was predominantly the strategy that I resolved around. Hang on to money, really hang on to money. The point of this deck is to never pay for anything, because you're probably paying for those 3 damage sides on young Vader, or you're paying for your removal. Try not to hardcast abilities even if you can afford it, unless you're really flush. But there are times where I was sitting on a lot of money, and there are a few adjustments I do hope to make to the deck that money does serve a little bit of a purpose, but hang on to it, because you never know when you'll get a chance to like roll out young Vader, and having no money and like losing on 3 damage is absolutely brutal. So the beauty of this deck is that it's moneyless unless you're like doing the holocron or things like that. But yeah, just hang on to your resources was a big deal. Understand that the first 2 rounds are probably the most crucial they're going to be for you, and you definitely need to make something die. If you have a strong first round and you can kill their strongest target on turn 2, I mean, obviously things are going your way, but that's your goal, is to just, go for the throat and take out the primary target on turn 1. If they're really shielded, you don't have your vibra knives, or just some of your damage got mitigated, things didn't go your way, maybe kill, whatever the weaker character is, maybe, and just get some dice off the table. Turn off things like Electroshock or whatever, possibly, although as that card's not as prevalent as it was before. But just keep things like that in mind. You have the explosivity, you have the power, you have the no mercies. Like, if you can do everything possible to kill the Titan, as I call it, and take them down, and make sure you have the right resources and the ability to do it, and feel free to re-roll to try and get those heavier damage numbers if you can, and just go for it. And I feel like this deck will carry you naturally as long as something dies.
And then the last thing I want to ask you is, after the tournament was over, you had some time to sit down and think about it. What were some of the things you would have changed in maybe your play style or the decisions you made that you feel would have advanced you a little bit further in the tournament?
So a lot of what caused me a lot of trouble was just getting like my head kicked in by Fast Hands Vader, and there isn't anything you can do about that. But as far as my personal proclivities with the deck, and like, I'm sure, thanks again the Artificery guys for crafting such a cool deck, and this deck gets like a 10 out of 10 Knights of Ren seal of approval. But for my personal preference, I'm probably going to, I think, here, spoiler for anyone who's playing on Saturday, I think I'm going to change 3 slots and get 2 lightsaber throws and 1 Kylo Ren saber in there. One of the things that happened a lot where young Vader would die, and then it would just be down to Kylo, and I wouldn't always have the ability to make him more prominent, and I would be sitting on like there was a game where I was sitting on 7 resources, and it was just like, why? I don't think Rise Again's the right call, but I do think if you do end up in a scenario where you do have some money, this would definitely not be I have 3 resources, I would play a Kylo Ren saber. But if the end game comes and I'm not able to spend all the money that I have, I would gladly drop down a Kylo saber, on the final throws. And I do think that would give him some longevity. And then I really like lightsaber throw. It's surprising. It changes changes the battle math. It is eating more into my resources, and I do understand that that's, the deck's kind of streamlined as it is, and it is going to affect me. I'm even considering throwing it back in. Earlier, the deck had Enrages, and Enrage is a really risky card because you are damaging yourself, but I do think if used properly I wouldn't necessarily always throw it out turn 1, but if towards the end of a game, if there's windows where I can enrage into a lightsaber throw, or I can enrage into a 3 Vader damage, or there are possibilities for it. I wouldn't use it so much as guaranteed money first opportunity, but as a combat trick in scenarios where they're underestimating the amount of money I have, or again, when it's just down to just Kylo versus whomever, maybe I can risk the 1 damage, to get that saber on him, and then maybe that'll carry me through, or I can pay for his newly minted 3 damage side on the Kylo saber. And again, it's going to change kind of the fundamentals and heart of the deck, and I'm trying to beat fast hands lists, but it's quite possible I'll play against decks that are going to, turn my stuff to blanks, and cutting into the blank interactive cards, might be the wrong call. I'm not even certain this is better. This is just more me, so to speak. I love being able to deal damage from every direction, and both Enrage and Young Vader, benefits for self damage are my favorite effects in the game, and I feel like if I can utilize those strategically, I would just personally have a lot more fun with the deck. It would be a different deck, and I am not at this moment saying it's any better.
All right. Do you guys have any last thoughts for our audience? Because we've gone over 2 major events, and, we've talked about matchups, tech cards, things that you guys have played. But, there's always more to be said, and you guys have got a lot of these games and decks under your belt. So any last thoughts?
I don't think we've seen everything of this meta. I don't think you should necessarily rest your laurels on the idea that it's just Pomaz, it's just Vader Raider, it's just Palp, it's just emo kids. Obviously early data suggests, from what's being reported, that that's what's popular, but we haven't seen all of what Unkar can do. I do think there are honestly some more hero lists that might be able to rear their head, and if you're feeling frustrated or don't like the way the meta's heading, I could be wrong, and this could be the meta for the rest of the summer until we get to see more Empire at War, but don't be afraid to try stuff. I personally do truly believe there are other things out there. I do think Rick had just as good of a shot with Qui-Gon Rey against Vibroknife. Poe-Ray doesn't use Vibroknife. Palpatine doesn't use Vibroknife. It's not in every deck. shields aren't irrelevant. You have to play around it. It's frustrating. Maybe there's more answers later, but I do find it interesting that people find Vibroknife to be the most cutting card. It was in my deck. It was relevant. I'm not saying it's not a problem, but I am saying it can't literally be everywhere if Palpatine and Pomaz are, doing what they're doing and they're not running it. So maybe you should give Qui-Gon Rey another look, or, don't completely give up on shields. There are ways, but you just have to be clever about it. You have to be ready for it. You do have to play around it. It's frustrating, but, Personal Shield's a really freaking good card. Maybe you can make it happen.
Yeah, and then both of these events that we were at, we had games against Pomaz that, we saw it firsthand that, they don't always roll what they want to roll. You're very dependent on getting the right rolls when you want them, and it's not the best deck out there, I don't think. It has a very good win rate on it, but it's not something that I would go into a tournament wanting, banking on the fact that I'm going to roll well every game. So, there are other decks out there. We both played 2 decks to pretty good showings that were not, Pomaz. I played one that I don't think anybody expected to do well in that tournament. I was the only one playing that deck in the tournament, and people sat up to me and they're like, "Oh man, this is going to be really interesting." And I was like, "Yeah, it's pretty fun." So just play what you want to play. If you want to play Pomaz, play Pomaz. You'll probably do well. But there's going to be situations where Poe and Maz aren't going to play nice together for you, and just be willing to have that game and know that, you know, if you lose one game, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I have to say the same thing. My decks, as I've been posting on our Facebook page, are super strange. You've got the Unkar Vehicles deck, which is doing pretty well in testing, the Unkar Jabba deck, which in the tournaments I've played is undefeated. And, you know, it's just a testament to the game that you don't have to play what's popular, and what's popular is not a guaranteed victory. You're never going to sit down and just win because you're playing Poe Maz or Palpatine or whatever gets popular. We saw the same thing with Jango Veers. You know, people were just talking about Jango Veers, Jango Veers, Jango Veers, and we realized it is beatable. It's a deck that's good, and it's a fun thing to play, but it's not just the end of the game and, you know, all hell and heaven have broken loose. So, you know, we just want to encourage anyone who's listening, like, just play what you want to play. And if you're having problems losing against a deck, jump on TTS, find people, figure out, you know, maybe you need to swap out this card for that card. Maybe it's just a different sequencing of events, you know, something that was said, you can play a card, maybe an action or two later to capitalize on something you've got in your hand. You know, you never know until you test and play what it might take to beat a deck. But decks are not guaranteed victories. You can definitely beat them for sure. So I just want to encourage everyone, like, just get out there and play and practice and get a feel for the deck you like to play.
Lastly, I want to give a shout out to Sean Redmond, again, the winner, the TO, my good friend. Something that was really great about this tournament was, like, we both sort of needed a confidence booster. I was still pretty frustrated that I didn't get to compete in Worlds and at least have an idea of where I stand. You know, and my recent luck lately, especially testing my goofy decks for SOR, like, it was just an incredibly long list of just losses and me just getting my head kicked in by decks of competitive and even just like, you know, no offense, my friends, but just like, I just put these cards together and I would just get utterly annihilated with the things that I crafted, and it was rough. And Sean has a long history of, you know, always the bridesmaid, never the bride, so to speak, where he brings it all and he plays really well, and he just falls short at the end. And I'm incredibly happy and proud of him that he took it, he earned it. You know, that set between him and I was one of the most grueling and intense matches in a card game, you know, we've ever played, and I just couldn't be happier for him, and he better know I'm coming for him.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on our first episode of season 3. A couple things we'd like to do some housekeeping on. We are in event heaven. We have got so many things coming up. So let's just give a couple mentions. There is an event coming out here in Orlando called X Wars. You can check that out on Facebook. It's a 3K cash event. We've obviously got Gen Con. All those tickets are sold out, but Jay is going to be going, and we're going to be getting some coverage out there. And we've also got Nova coming up later in the end of August, early September. So there's another opportunity. If you weren't able to get your Gen Con tickets, definitely check out the Nova Open. They've got plenty of Destiny going on there. And just a big announcement, we are going to be making some adjustments to our Patreon. So we are going to be retiring the playmat and the sticker temporarily for a little bit. And what we're going to be changing is our show. So we are going to be adding a smaller show where we're going to have just a round discussion with our Patreons about topics over a 20 to 30 minute period. And we are really excited to get that up and running in July. So we're going to be setting all of that up in June, getting everything prepped. So take a look at our new Patreon, tiers, rewards, and all of that good stuff. And as we wrap up this week, thank you everyone for listening. Best of luck with all of your local events and store championships as they're going to be coming up, and may the force be with you.